Salutations everyone! And today we're going to be looking at One Piece chapter 902, End Roll. So without further ado, let's get into it. So in this issue of Jump, One Piece and a few other series are on the front cover. So you know what that means. Color page. This time we've got a really cool whole cake-esque themed spread. It has Luffy punching his way through some ice cream cone looking men, and it's just so vibrant with colors, and you've got the most adorable Straw Hats who are all gingerbread men, except for Brook, who's a gingerbread skeleton, and I guess Frankie's a gingerbread cyborg? Now, I don't see Jinbei here, which is a big disappointment. I was kind of hoping he'll be included. You've got Zoro, Sanji, Nami, Frankie, Brook, and Robin all in gingerbread form. And you've got Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper as the Sweet Busters. It sounds like a send-up to Ghostbusters to me. You've got a Slimer-looking guy in the top left-hand corner, and other spooky stuff such as a bat, a cloud that looks like Zeus, and yeah, just in general, it's like a mix between Thriller Bark and Whole Cake Island. You even have Biscuit Men, which of course invokes Cracker from earlier on in the arc. Now, I think it's a shame that Jinbei isn't on the page, because it would have been nice to get absolute confirmation that he's a Straw Hat. However, I think most of us have accepted the fact that he's joined by now. Even the wiki has updated its entry to include him. However, I know that there are people who just aren't going to accept it until they see a color page, an eye catch, or an OP. So what can you say about the Jinbei doubters? Either way, this is a really pretty looking color spread, and I can't wait to get into the chapter. So let's go. So in general, this was a lot more of a emotional, reflective chapter of One Piece. In my opinion, it is the emotional climax to the arc. We've got a lot of characters just thinking back on events that have transpired and how they've affected them, and we get more insight into some of the key players of the arc, especially those side characters who we're likely going to move away from now as we move into the Reverie and Wano. So we start up with Sanji being told that Pedro died, and he flashes back to the first time he met him. We get emphasis again on Dogstorm and Cat Viper, and how the world is waiting for them. Now this does two things. One, it shows how much Pedro loved the Mink tribe and how hard he tried to protect them. But it also puts Cat Viper and Dogstorm in our minds again, because we are presumably going to see them soon in Wano, and their storyline will become much more relevant then. Sanji feels really guilty, like he dragged Pedro into it. And of course, it's easy to see why. He sort of decided to come here on a whim. In fact, I would go as far to say it's kind of out of character for him. He doubted that Luffy could take on Big Mom and Kaido at the same time, and he wanted to wrap up his family business once and for all. It's not like he knew that Zeph's life was in danger back on Zao. He mostly went there just to tie up loose ends and make sure that problems weren't caused for Luffy. But in doing so, he's starting to realize that he might have caused a lot of problems for Luffy. However, Carrot reassures him that this was Pedro's decision, and that Pedro felt that he owed Sanji for saving the dukedom in the first place. Not to mention, if he hadn't taken the actions he did, all of them would be dead right now. So Carrot tells him to just thank him instead, and we get this heartbreaking panel of her just breaking down into tears. So it does seem like Oda is sticking with his guns, because Pedro hasn't shown up on the ship, he hasn't shown up on Whole Cake Island in this chapter, and while I'm still skeptical, I still think that Virgo and Monet can pop up at any time. It is starting to look like he's sticking to that sacrifice play. And if that's the case, I would be very sad, but at the same time very happy, because from a writing perspective, Oda should be trying to up the stakes and make us feel like the New World and the Yonko are a legitimate threat that can actually take out any of our main characters at any moment. Now, it would be a terrible story if any character can die at any moment. However, when you're creating a drama-filled series, you need to create that illusion that people can die. At least, that's how it usually works. One Piece has thus far been able to avoid doing this by remaining relatively tongue-in-cheek and usually implying a death and then revealing that it never really happened. We get a fairly definitive emotional ending for Pedro's story arc. He came to Whole Cake Island once, lost his partner and his eye, and when he returned years later, he had barely any time to live and sacrificed himself to not only save his friends but perhaps influence the entire world, given Luffy's presumable actions in the future. It is kind of poetic in a way that he would survive the first time and die this time visiting Whole Cake Island, given that the entire mantra for Whole Cake Island is that it's a paradise that you cannot escape alive. But if Moscarto is alive, I find it very hard to believe that Pound and Pedro are going to stay dead too. These kinds of cop-outs are prevalent throughout the entire series, ever since Pell and Arabasta. And he's got a lot of unfinished business when it comes to the safety and happiness of the Minx, and you don't typically see characters in One Piece dying if they've got unfinished business. So we'll have to wait and see. Sanji and Carrot have a nice bonding moment, and honestly I think this will be a very welcome scene for people who want Carrot to join the crew. Personally, when it comes to Carrot joining, I've got a few issues. Firstly, her name's a bit generic. I'm not sure that you can market Carrot very well, and she sort of treads on other Straw Hats' territory. For example, she's got lightning powers, just like Nami. Well, she's got Electro, but it's basically the same thing. She's an animal like Chopper, and she's got Sanji's blonde hair, so she's kind of taking his color scheme. Not to mention you've got a lack of a flashback, a role on the ship, and a dream. But in my opinion, it would be nice to have another girl on the crew. I'm just not certain that Carrot is the character at the moment, but she's been a really cool side character this arc. And I really want to see how she's going to be developed further in Wano. We've got a panel of Chopper treating Luffy's injuries. He's very heavily bandaged, and it seems like he's lost a lot of blood. And then we cut to a shot of Brook and Nami noticing the cotton candy snow, which means that they must be exiting Mama's territory. So in this shot with Jinbei, we've got him basically shouting out that they only have to hang on for a little longer until Luffy and the rest are out of the territory. So presumably a lot of time has passed and the Fisherman Pirates are doing quite well so far at holding them off. I think it's pretty clear that Boss Jinbei is making all the difference here though. Now what I've neglected to mention is that there are some poetic panels chock full with basically metaphors about leaving Whole Cake Island and comparing the allure of it to the enticement of going to get something sweet, but when you try and leave it, it means death. It also represents all the events that take place as a puppet show. So these song boxes set a ominous tone for the rest of the chapter. And during all of this commotion, we get to see Pudding, who is recollecting all of the important events of this arc and before. So we get some cool insight during this montage, because it includes Big Mom ordering Pudding to deceive Sanji. And she actually refers to Pudding as her own marionette, her own puppet basically. And the insight we actually get into Pudding is that her meanness, her evilness earlier on, the weird faces she was making and all that boastfulness in front of Reiju, that was really the act. That was her putting on a tough face because she believed that no one could love someone like her. And she might have gotten some pleasure in getting back in a way by being cruel and vindictive, but deep down she was just insecure. And so it makes her reaction to Sanji complimenting her eyes a lot more believable. We continue the montage and we see them preparing the cake and also the scene that happened 3 chapters ago. And this is a really cool page. We get to see it from her perspective sort of, but we've got film reels all over it. So we know that the memory power is involved somehow. but it isn't quite revealed until we turn the page. We get to re-see her reaching out and taking the cigarette from Sanji and stepping on it. I know a lot of people thought that she was going to ask Sanji to stop smoking, but what she actually does is a lot more heartbreaking and a lot more relevant to the arc, because all of us thought that her power had to come into play at some point. It's just such a big plot point earlier on, and it feels weird that Oda would introduce it and not have it relevant to the resolution. Most of us thought that Big Mom might have her memories messed with, but I think what Oda has done here is a lot more emotionally relevant and unexpected. And this entire page is capped off with a repeat of a line she said earlier on in the arc. "Thank you for everything, goodbye." Which she said with a rather cruel insult and a insincere smile to Luffy and Nami while they're in the prison cells. And now she says it with absolute genuineness to Sanji, who unfortunately may not remember these events. As we turn the page, we find out that Sanji has completely forgotten what just happened, and it turns out that Pudding erased his memories of them kissing. Which is heartbreaking. However, it's not like Sanji lost all his memories of Pudding, just the one that would make him super attached. I think she's doing this so that he can go about his life and not think about someone like her. I'm pretty sure she still undervalues herself, and also she knows that she can't really escape this life with Big Mom. I think what I take from this is that she is grateful to have met someone like Sanji, but heartbroken that she can't go with him and their time together was so short. Now, I am wondering if she can ever restore a memory to someone. Now, this Pudding stuff for me is really interesting character-wise, however, I'm not very satisfied with the way Oda set it up. In my opinion, Luffy's entire hunger strike doesn't last long enough. So I don't really buy that Luffy is starving when Sanji goes back to him. I don't buy that Sanji's that desperate. And most importantly, I don't buy that Sanji was that in love with Pudding. It would have been a different story entirely if Oda had decided to montage a week of Luffy refusing to eat in his cell, Chopper and Carrot being lost in the mirror maze, and Brook and Pedro just planning how they're going to steal the poneglyph during this whole week, while we see Pudding and Sanji just bonding in a montage. I think that would have sold me on their relationship a lot more. However, quibbling aside, I do think that this is really effective, and I am curious to see what will happen when Sanji crosses paths with Pudding again in the future. What's really clever is that Sanji doesn't remember what the request was, and so we, the readers, at the time, didn't get to see the kiss. It's only when Pudding reflects back on it that we get to see it. So I think it's pretty cool that Oda laid out the chapters to reflect that. Next up, we get a shot of Germa basically having to retreat because the forces of Big Mom are just too overwhelming. After this, we get Brulel and Katakuri just sitting together after the fight ended. She removes the hat covering his mouth, so she's obviously in on how Katakuri looks, and Katakuri isn't really afraid to be himself around her. So Brulel actually drops the bombshell. You fell on your back on purpose, didn't you? So it seems like some of my friends were right, and he actually decided to fall backwards intentionally. I didn't expect this. I thought that yes, it was a kind of salute to Luffy, but I thought Luffy had completely earned it. And even Katakuri is wondering why he did that. I think I've got a reason why. Katakuri is a really interesting character because he's ridiculously strong and talented, and has haki so powerful that he can actually see into the future. Now, I presume that this would make him somewhat of a glass jaw, and so I wasn't that taken aback by Luffy actually beating him, but I think this chapter made everything clear. Luffy did beat Katakuri, but more in a battle of willpower. Katakuri is someone who's under the thumb of his mother. His mother, who sort of kind of isn't the best and points out her children's unique points as weaknesses or freak shows. And as a result of this and the flashback which is coming up, Katakuri hides his face, and someone who hides their face can't really be true to themselves. And if you're not true to yourself, you lack a certain amount of pride, a certain amount of warrior spirit. Because Luffy has pride in abundance, pride that keeps getting him back to his feet. He has to be proud and confident of his abilities if he's ever going to be Pirate King, and if he's going to protect his friends. Katakuri has never really faced someone like this, at least I don't think he has. And being yourself is the most important thing. So in that respect, the fight could only end in one way, because Luffy kept getting back up, and Katakuri could not foresee anything but Luffy beating him. So I think that Luffy did actually beat Katakuri, but him falling backwards is not only a show of respect, but symbolic of the way Luffy triumphed over him. Because it's not, strictly speaking, only a physical victory. I do think he took Katakuri to his limits, but Katakuri decided to give up. And in doing so, he showed Luffy the ultimate respect. Katakuri starts to think that his entire reputation is a facade. And Brulel actually confirms this, saying that she's seen him in mirrors when he thought that he was alone. Which is sort of creepy, but we actually transition into a flashback from when they were kids. So in the flashback we get to see Parasparrow, Katakuri and Oven as kids, and they're telling him that if he hit his mouth he'll be able to make more friends, and Katakuri is like, nah, I don't need friends, I'll just beat anyone who laughs at me. And we get to see that some people actually scarred Brulel. I was wondering about the scar, it was very prominent, but I thought Oda just put it there to look creepy. And it turned out that some people who Katakuri beat up came back and got their revenge on her. And Katakuri couldn't really comprehend that he wasn't the one who had to face the consequences. And we get the saddest panel, man. We get Brulel saying that she's fine and Katakuri is fine the way he is. I never thought that Brulel would be the emotional center to this, but it's really cool that Katakuri is really touched by this and notes how naive he was being and how this world requires him to put on appearances. So this is when he starts covering his face with the scarf, and he looks really cool, but like, he shouldn't have to do that. And that's the entire point. So it's neat that Katakuri's reason for covering his face is not because he's strictly speaking ashamed of it, but he's ashamed of the consequences of his uniqueness, i.e., people around him might get hurt. So we see Katakuri reappearing, this time masked, and taking on the guys who are just basically begging for forgiveness because they know they're screwed. But that's not going to stop Katakuri, and that actually transitions us out of the flashback. Presumably from that, Katakuri built up his reputation of never falling on his back through various fights that start in a similar way, as well as the fights which Big Mom assigned him to take on during his life as a pirate. It's probably how he got that powerful, and maybe he even honed his haki through various fights. But I do have to say one thing. Brulel gets scarred, Katakuri gets bullied for his mouth, and Pudding is traumatized because of what people used to say about her eye. Do these people not know that these children are the children of a Yonko? Now granted, I don't think Big Mom particularly cares about what people say about her kids, but I wouldn't poke the bear. And I don't know why these guys are poking the bear. Anyway, coming out of the flashback, we see Brulel treating his injuries and saying, I bet you'll get a kick out of where Luffy is right now. And she confirms that the Straw Hats have actually left Big Mom's territory. Hearing this news, Katakuri smirks, and that's exactly the reaction Brulel expected. So then we get a really cool 2-page spread that actually concludes the song that began earlier. It starts by recapping that if you're lured in by the smell of sweets, then you'll have to pay what's due. And what's really cool is that when it's showing the lured in part, it's showing the Germa 66. And they were lured in. They decided to make a wedding alliance. And yeah, it was basically all a trap. So I really like the way Oda has laid this out, because the next part's relevant too. We get to see Jinbei and the Fishermen Pirates, and that's over the pay me what I'm due part of the song. And Jinbei obviously owes Big Mom quite a lot for protecting Fishman Island, and the initial idea was that he would join the crew along with all the Sun Pirates, but it didn't really pan out that way. Now, Big Mom allowed Jinbei to leave her crew, but she doesn't want him to stay alive. And that transitions us to the end of the song, where we get to see more combat of the Germa fleet and the Big Mom fleet facing off, with presumably all of the fishmen in the middle, and Big Mom finally arriving. The Big Mom pirates let out a cheer, and we get the end of the song, which culminates with Big Mom saying what it was always going to lead up to: life or death. Basically, not giving them a choice. You're going to give me your entire lifespan, or you'll die. One or the other. Now, I always thought that it was playing off of Trick or Treat, and I always thought about it from a meta aspect, but seeing it come full circle to life and death was really a satisfying experience. So yeah, I think this is the last time we're going to see Germa 66 and the Big Mom Pirates, at least for the time being. Obviously, we'll get a flashback explaining how they got out of this pinch, because Sanji's entire goal was to save his family. As despicable as they are, he couldn't abandon them. Yet now he is, and I was trying to think what the difference is between this and the wedding. And I think the answer is that the wedding was an ambush, so they didn't choose to step into that situation. But now, the Vinsmokes decided to actually take it to Big Mom, so it's sort of their problem. Or more likely, it's their decision, and I think the fact that it was their choice makes all the difference to Sanji. Or maybe he just has faith that they'll escape. To be honest, it reminds me a lot of what happened to Ace, where Luffy was able to save him from the podium, but wasn't able to save him from himself. Because once Akainu installed Tid Whitebeard, it was just like calling Marty McFly chicken. You don't do that. And he just couldn't run away, and that led to his doom. Maybe it's a similar thing for Germa, but honestly, they're gonna get away. It's just a question of how, and I really want it to be a mech. And of course, hopefully Jinbei makes it out alive with all of the Sun Pirates. But I feel like something significant has to happen. Otherwise, Oda is just spinning his wheels on the Jinbei front. Admittedly, in a really entertaining way, but I would like to see some development. Just please don't let it be a death. And then we transition to the final scene of the chapter. The Straw Hats are out of danger, and the first thing they want, of course, is food, which parallels the beginning of the arc when they wanted food and Luffy ended up cooking and poison, but yeah, we all know what happened. I can see why they're so happy to have Sanji back. Sanji, not knowing any of this, is quite bewildered, but he gets to work because of the ideas that were instilled in him when he was a kid, starving on a rock with an old man. And we cut all the way back to the East Blue to see what that old man is doing, and coincidentally, he's in a very similar situation, where people are demanding that he cooks, and they're not very nice people. They look like pirates, and his employees are wondering, why are you doing this? However, he's not hearing any of it. He starts to cook. And then we get a concurrent scene of Sanji and Zeph saying the exact same thing, even though both of them are on the opposite side of the world from each other. If someone's hungry, I'll feed them. The talking can come afterwards. And with the dawn, we end chapter 902 with no break next week. So yeah, that was the chapter, and quite frankly, I think that was the arc. I think this is the finale to Whole Cake Island. And man, what a ride it's been. Whole Cake Island has been an interesting arc. I was delighted when we first got an indication of this arc, back when Sanji's family was first mentioned, because at that point I'd been wondering about Sanji's origins for a long time. And I figured that it was something Oda was saving, because he had built up to it so much with the North Blue stuff, and with other little tidbits that Sanji had mentioned about his past. So it's really gratifying to see it all come to fruition, and to see Big Mom in action, and it's always nice to see Jinbei again. I was delighted to hear that this would be a wedding arc because it's a unique setting for One Piece, and Whole Cake Island as a whole was a really cool place. Of all the places we've been to throughout the years in One Piece, Whole Cake Island will go down as one of the coolest. The soul tax, the living sweets, and the numerous races that live together in harmony. It's just a really cool setting. I do wish we got to spend a lot more time in the various islands around the archipelago. I do think that this arc was somewhat rushed in the early goings. I think that the Sanji flashback could have stood to last a few chapters longer and have a bit more context, and I really wish that the Luffy hunger strike in universe was given more time by Oda. But as a whole, it was a really entertaining arc and one of the best since the time skip. Now, the arcs since the time skip haven't been the strongest in series history, but all of them have had a unique charm to them. And really, I only think that Whole Cake Island makes a few big missteps, such as Sanji feeling a tad out of character to me, repeating Robin's sacrifice for the crew, only on a slightly different scale. I do think this was a cool arc character-wise, because Sanji, Luffy, and Jinbei all go through some really cool character development. And we got some really great side characters, such as Pedro and Katakuri, who also got a lot of shine. I feel like we didn't really get the conclusion we should have on the Germa side of things. I think that Judge should have acknowledged that Sanji's strength is a strength worth having, and Sanji could have rejected Judge to come full circle from the flashback. And yeah, that kind of happens, but it's not as explicit as I was expecting it to be. I think Oda might be holding his cards close to his chest for a future meeting. But yeah, all the characters got to shine in this arc. Nami got to shine, she was really helpful throughout the arc, and just the existence of Lola's Vivro card made Nami really significant in this arc, not to mention what she was able to pull off in combat with the rain against Cracker and the lightning rod against Big Mom. Chopper felt a little less significant than the rest. However, he did have some really nice moments to shine in the mirror world. And of course we've got Carrot, who's a new addition to the cast, however is still technically speaking a side character. She had really good support roles throughout the entire thing, and her only real standout moment was of course the full moon. However, that moment was so significant on its own that it more than makes up for it. Finally, we've got Brook, the Soul King. MVP. He did so much, from getting the poneglyphs, the road poneglyph especially, because we need all four to get to Raftel. Brook basically did a quarter of the journey of One Piece during this arc. He smashed the Mother Carmel photo, he had some awesome badass combat moments, and there is one thing which I really wish happened with him in this arc, but I think I'll have to go into that in another video. So yeah, overall, Whole Cake Island has just been a really fun ride. A ride that has somewhat suffered in pacing, but ultimately one that I was really happy to have ridden. My only concern is what this means for the future of the series and whether or not there will be any lasting impact, because a lot of this could have been achieved off screen. With Jinbei staying put and delaying that for a while, with Germa not getting a complete resolution, and with Big Mom's fury already established, it feels like if Sanji had just decided to ignore this request, kick Burge's ass and stay until Luffy arrived, and they all went off to Wano, and Jinbei just shows up later, and we get a flashback info dump about how he left Big Mom's crew, we would have reached the same place. And yeah, we'll see Big Mom in the future and probably get references to these events. And we'll definitely see Germa 66 in the future and get references to these events. But none of it seems necessary to me at the moment. At least not until Oda really shows me how the tapestry all ties together. Because Germa could have just been like, oh Sanji, our hated failure son, and we could have just gone into a flashback whenever we saw them for the first time. Didn't strictly have to be at Whole Cake Island. So yeah, I am just a bit concerned because with certain arcs you just point to a big event and say that was the point. But when an arc lacks that, such as Skypiea, people tend not to give it a fair shake. And I don't want that to happen to Whole Cake Island. Before I thought we could just point to Jinbei's recruiting, but now we can't do that, so I am curious to see what the perception of Whole Cake Island will be in the future. Anyway, that will do it for today. It's been a really fun chapter. I had a lot of fun getting my thoughts out on it. I hope you had a lot of fun watching. If you did, like, comment and subscribe. Let me know what you thought. If you enjoyed this content, maybe you'll like to check out some of these other videos. But regardless, it's been a blast, and I hope to see you next time. Farewell.